Greetings, everyone. Wilkinson here. Today I am with Brett Paesel, and she lives in Hollywood. And I met her, when we meet? In November, right?
In November at a show, a spoken word show.
Right, yep. And I liked what she had to say, and I said, hey, you got to get over here. And it's taken 4 months, but yay, she's here. Her husband, Pat, came with her, but he's out. I don't know what he's doing.
He's checking into the hotel. Yes, exactly.
Anyway, say hi to my people.
Hello, Wilkinson's people.
Ah, great. I'm glad you're here. So let's see. So you were born in Germany, but you're not German. How'd that happen?
My parents were educators in the military. For military kids, my father was just an English teacher, and my mother was a kindergarten, first grade teacher.
Oh, so she taught there too.
She did it initially, and then when we were born, she decided to be a housewife, as was the 60s model.
Well, she's supposed to, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. She followed the course
she
that was prescribed
She
for
did
her.
the right thing, Wilkinson, is what she did.
Well, fooey with all that, right?
Exactly.
All right. So you were there. How was it growing? So did you grow up in Germany, or did you bop around?
I grew up mostly in Munich, Germany, and also in Bitburg and Kaiserslautern, but I was also in England for 6 years. So England and Germany were my...
Which did you like better?
I'm an Anglophile, so I loved England.
Did you?
Yeah, a lot. And still do. I still feel probably the most at home in London.
It's funny because I've been to Europe like 3 times, but when I go there, I feel more at home in Europe than I do in the United States.
Me too.
Maybe in a former life or something. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I do too.
Yeah. What did you do in England?
What did
Was your parents there?
My parents were stationed.
Okay.
Even though they were not military, it was still stationed for a tour in Newmarket. We lived in Newmarket, and then we lived in Woodstock near Oxford.
Have you gone back to either place?
I have. Well, I go back to London all the time, and then I took my 19-year-old son to London right after the pandemic. Oh. And we went to visit old British friends of my parents in a little village near Oxford. And my 19-year-old was telling his friends, they're so British, they don't even live in London. Yeah, so we have been back.
Huh. So you were in Europe, and then you said you told me earlier you were out around 20 when you came back to the States? Mm-hmm. And you went to school in Indiana?
Indiana University.
Why?
It was the only, you know why? It's so amazing, the random things that happen. Because I had a favorite high school teacher who went to school there.
Really?
That's it. I never applied to anywhere else. I went my first year to college in London, but I couldn't afford to stay there. So I had to transfer to an American school, and this teacher, Mrs. Thompson, said, go to Indiana University. And so I did, without questioning it. I never thought of anywhere. I didn't know the States. So to me, it was as random as anything else.
Was she in Europe when she told you that, your teacher? Okay.
Yeah, she was my journalism teacher in high school.
Any regrets for going there?
I'm not a regretter. I think I could have probably made a stronger choice. No offense to people who went to IU, but I wish I had done something more exotic, like, gone to a big city or something like that. But no, I don't regret it. It was very Midwestern, very, very conservative outside of the university itself.
And what did you study?
I studied theater and drama.
And where did that take you?
That took me to New York City, where I went to Circle in the Square acting school, and I was a semi-professional actor for a few years on stage in Chicago, and then came here to Los Angeles and ended up doing basically 2 TV series. So I had what most people would consider a very moderate career. And then this horrible accident happened to me, which was that I turned 40. That's my joke. And so that's when I switched to writing, because I had a face that was suited to writing.
Huh. Oh my, come on.
No. I'm not being falsely modest or weird about it. I'm just saying that that's true. The first show that I was in was a sketch show called Mr. Show with Bob and David on HBO. And I often tell my writing students, I teach writing now, that there aren't any roles for women in sketch after the age of 40 unless you're Catherine O'Hara. She's got them all. That's it.
That's not fair. What was the other show?
Transparent. So
Now, you told me earlier that your husband, Pat, and your son are actors.
Yep.
Is that primarily what they do?
Yes, that's all that Pat does. He's a commercial actor too, so that keeps us in health insurance and stuff like that.
Wow.
And my younger son, who's 19, is starting out. So he's already done some dubbing and stuff like that. So
He's not the one you took to Europe. That was
I took both of my sons to
did?
Europe separately. It was a way to trap them into
Mom,
paying
son
attention
time,
to
right?
mom.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, that's the way you do it. You get them somewhere where they have no friends, no possibility of.
Right. Well, he still has a cell phone, though, right?
Yes, which they both used fairly liberally, and I'm just kidding about that. But it was really fun having that time with them.
Where did you meet Pat?
I met Pat at Indiana University.
Well, there you go.
Well, I was visiting friends. I had
okay.
left. I had
Oh, you
gone
had
to New
left. You
York
went
City,
back. Okay.
and then I went back and met this guy who I didn't
But
take
if
very
you hadn't
seriously.
gone there, you wouldn't have gone back.
True, I would not have. I might have married, someone famous, Kenneth Branagh.
Maybe.
Because I auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts when I was 17 and living in London. And I was called back in the afternoon, and I was called back with Kenneth Branagh. So I know that he got in and I didn't, but I often think that I could have been Emma Thompson and married Kenneth Branagh. He doesn't know that. We came close.
You going to tell him?
If I ever meet him, for sure, yeah.
Tell me a little about early growing up. I think you have an interesting story with your father. What happened there?
Oh, well, my father was a drama teacher in high school, and my mother was an artist. And so, meaning a painter. And so we lived in, when I try to describe our early years in Munich, it's kind of wild because it was the years of Radio Free Europe. So we lived sort of on the other side of the Iron Curtain, obviously, in West Germany. But a lot of the people that we interacted with worked for Radio Free Europe, or they were what was then called spooks. They were spies.
Wow.
So it was a sort of strangely intellectual, artistic type of community that was fused with the military community, if that makes sense. Like they're just an odd
really.
combination, right?
Right.
Yeah. It's an odd combination, but very true. We lived near, sometimes on and sometimes near what was called the Kaserne, which was the base, the military base.
So you lived off base.
We lived
primarily
on base for a while and then off base, moved off base to a German suburb of Munich. And so it was a very intellectually and artistically interesting time. You can imagine the 60s, the Cold War, Germany, where the dollar was really good. So we lived very well for people who were just teachers. I mean, you couldn't have lived like that in the United States. And then we moved to England, and my mother started painting, probably to alleviate her boredom as a housewife, basically. And she became quite successful. So my father became her manager, and we lived in England for a while, and she would exhibit here and there, and my father became an administrator, was originally a teacher and then became an administrator. So it was a very exciting and different kind of upbringing that I even appreciated at the time, to be honest. It was very colorful. And then I'm actually writing a novel about it right now. It takes place in the 60s in Newmarket, because I think what the incident you're referring to is that about 5 years ago, my mother, who was descending into dementia pretty rapidly, told me that my father was gay and that she had always known that he was gay even when she got married to him, because she asked him to marry her and he said, "I can't because I'm gay." I think he said the word homosexual, not gay at the time. She then said, "Well, that's okay," basically. So she always knew this. He used to go out on Friday nights. She never asked what he did. She assumed he went to gay bars and maybe had relationships. But other than that, they had a completely, to outward appearances,
Normal, yeah.
what would be considered a normal marriage in the 60s and 70s.
Now, when she told you this, was he still living?
Yes. And she told me that I could not talk to him or ask him about it. And also, I couldn't tell anyone until he was gone, had died. And through some of my own exploration and a little bit more conversation with her, although there wasn't much, I surmised that one of the reasons why he was in a love relationship with my mother was, first of all, she was his best friend, but also because he felt so deeply ashamed in the 50s and 60s that still stuck with him. So the idea that I would ask him about it or tell anybody else about it, even though this was 5 years ago and one would imagine that not many people would care that much, certainly within our artistic circle.
But yet, would he have worked through that himself, the shame and all that? Who knows?
I doubt that he would have, because I think he enjoyed the look of the family being heteronormative. You know. He enjoyed I didn't. My older, I said older. I don't know why. My younger brother did. I didn't. He did finally.
Did you tell your brother, or did your mother tell your brother?
I told my younger brother.
Now, did you tell your
brother? The middle
or
brother
did your
already
mother
knew.
Tell your brother?
And had been sworn to secrecy by my father.
Okay.
Yes. And we're a kind of very expressive storytelling family, so
secrets.
that was shocking to me, because I always thought that one thing that was kind of a little bit boring about us was that we had no secrets, and we seemed to have this sort of again, normal lifestyle in that we kind of liked each other, we traveled together, stuff like that. So it was a complete surprise to me that we had secrets. It was more of a surprise to me that we had secrets than it was that, yes, exactly.
So how soon before your father passed? Then the secret. Wow.
I think it was about
a
couple of years,
soon
2 or 3 years.
before your father passed, did your brother talk to you?
I know that they were in a car, because that's how guys do things, Wilkinson.
Do you know how that unfolded?
They have to look out at the window. You can't look at anybody, right?
I'm gay, so I don't have those rules. It is.
You don't, but you acknowledge them, right? I think women tend to like to gaze into each other's eyes. Men like to be side by side. I mean, in general,
I understand
I'm talking about that since I have 2 sons and a husband.
Gazing outward.
Yes, gazing outward like they like to do. And
I'll give you that one.
My brother Keir said something.
So they were in the
he
car
sent the
gazing
transcript
outward.
to us, which was interesting. My brother Keir did. He said, written like a script. So I know, and it was sort of in real time, like right after he had had the conversation. So he says he didn't record it, but he recorded it in his head. Yeah. And he said something like, Mom told us you were gay.
From memory,
and my father, according to the script and according to Keir, kept saying that was a long time ago. He kept wanting to shut it down a little bit. He didn't shut it down completely, but he never denied it. He just said it was a long time ago. And then one thing that surprised us was that a couple of friends of ours who we knew to be gay knew that he was. So that either meant that he had told them or they had surmised it. We don't know. But the main part of the story that makes me feel good about it, because I was sort of honoring my mother's edict not to talk to my father, was that Keir, my brother, got to say, we love you anyway. Not to talk to my father was that Keir, my brother, got to say, we love you anyway. And I don't know that my father responded necessarily, but at least he heard that.
Right. Wow. So how did you feel when you heard it from your mother?
I was more surprised at that there was a whole thing that I didn't know than I was that my father was gay. swore myself to secrecy with my mother and then immediately ran upstairs and told my husband, as you do, right? And my husband didn't have any response either. We both went, oh, that makes sense. And so there was a process of connecting dots. I don't know if you've had that experience of when you get this new piece of information and you say to yourself, oh, that's why. And
so
then
I was going to ask you, why did it make sense? So this is, you're connecting dots.
Yes, I was connecting dots. Like, I do remember that he went out on Friday nights by himself. That was a sort of oddity in our family that most couples tend to, from the 60s and 70s, you know, there was a sort of coupledom type thing. You did things in couples.
Right.
And my parents were different that way. So that made sense. And then there was some classically gay tags that my father, or boxes that my father would have ticked. Like he loved opera and he was an interior designer type and a little light physically in his loafers, if you will. You know what I mean? Like things that don't mean anything except that in light of the secret, you say to yourself, well, I wouldn't say he wasn't gay. Right. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not the most far-fetched thing in the world.
So your younger brother did that, and your other brother knew. Mm-hmm. Did he get in on the conversation, or was he kind of was it just between you and your younger brother?
My younger brother had the conversation with my father and then disseminated the transcript.
Right. But he did it to everybody?
Yes, yeah.
And that's just you and the two brothers?
Yeah.
In your family? Okay.
Yeah.
So did your mother know that your younger brother did that or not?
I don't know,
because
by then she had her Alzheimer's was pretty advanced. I mean, so that I did all of that dot connecting, and so did my husband, for example. I mean, he and I talked about it a lot, and it also, but there were also other things that made sense. For example, my father had been depressed all his life, drank too much. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily must have had all to do with that. I'm sure it didn't, but I do think that there was a part of my father that was unexpressed. I mean, that's just a fact.
Well, plus there had to be more pressure because of the environment he was in.
Right,
the military
in the military.
So
yeah, you could get fired.
Yeah.
Literally fired.
So he's got to have conflict going on here.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So those kinds of things also were tells. Like when I look back and I think, oh, yeah, I'd be depressed. You know what I mean? And so there was a lot of reckoning about that and some sadness, I think, from me that not only was my father probably unfulfilled, but that my mother was too. But being in the middle of writing this novel that takes place in the 60s that's sort of based around this idea, meaning I don't know what happened. But the
novel is part your father's story?
Is basically about a couple who made this agreement like my parents did. So then I went through that kind of process of sort of feeling like they didn't have, those storybook projections of what would make somebody happy, meaning a fulfilling sexual and romantic relationship. But in the course of writing the book and also in thinking about it, I began to realize that it was actually an incredible love story because they were best friends. They were very physical with each other, very affectionate and supportive. And I think that my father got cover and he got a partner who was his best friend. But for my mother, in the 60s and 70s, you were sort of attached to a guy and they were your identity, right? Especially in the military. You were married to the colonel or you were married to blah, blah, blah. My mother was an artist and her manager was my father, so he supported her artistic career, which was the thing she was most attached to.
I wonder if he was straight, if he would have done that.
That's what I think is, or posit or suggest that might not have been the case. Right. And not because there aren't straight guys who are terribly supportive, but it certainly wasn't the model. Right. The model was not in the 60s and 70s that a husband was gung-ho, sort of pushing his wife's career ahead. Right. So I think that they both settled into that comfort of having a partner who was supporting them in what they needed. And so they missed things, and I can feel the sadness of that because I have a little bit more well-rounded relationship with my husband, i.e. we have sex.
Oh, you're straight?
Exactly.
So I've been meaning to ask this. I have so many gay guys on here. So when did you figure out that you were straight?
Oh, when did I...
Did you feel normal? I've been saving that for somebody. And you're the perfect
I
guy.
know. Well, good. I'm glad I gave you that opportunity. I think that because I grew up in an artistic family, and even though I didn't know that my father was gay, that we certainly had artist friends who had all sorts of different lifestyles. And I do remember when I was in my 20s thinking that being a straight woman was rather boring.
Oh, really? Did they have lesbian friends too, or was it just gay guys?
They did. I wouldn't have known to say that or categorize it that way, and I don't think they did with me. But we had aunts and uncles in quotation marks because we lived overseas and we didn't really know our extended family that well. And I had two aunts who lived together and were clearly gay, and that in my 30s and 40s, when you talked about it a little bit more, my parents even acknowledged that fact. Yeah. They were, and you know that, I mean, you look like you're somewhere in my age range. You know that kind of tacit.
I'm a bit older. But thank you.
That tacit understanding that people grew up with those years, where you kind of knew that the two guys who lived down the street were a couple, but nobody said that, and you didn't even really know what that looked like, really, but you just knew it.
So let's see. So you're teaching,
and
you're writing a novel.
I am.
And you are a storyteller.
I am a storyteller.
How did you get into storytelling?
I got into storytelling when when I turned 40 and lost my acting career, or it's sort of by choice. I didn't necessarily. It wasn't like the world was terribly cruel to me.
Wasn't acting a story though? I mean, so you're kind of like going from one thing to another.
And so I started writing, and I found out that if I went to spoken word venues, that it was a way of forcing people to listen to your writing. And so, you know what I mean? Like, it is.
I hadn't thought of that.
Exactly. Yeah. So people have to listen. They're stuck there. And so I used it as a way, number one, to figure out what in my writing was working and what wasn't, which was great because, boy, you can feel when you lose an audience. And I'm like, okay, and mental note, let's go back to that paragraph and see if we need it. So I did it for that reason, but I also was sort of hoping that I was being career smart by using my acting chops to further my writing career, which, is debatable whether that was successful.
So did you participate in Strong Words in LA then?
I did quite a bit.
That's where you started?
Yeah.
How many times you're on there?
Oh my goodness. I would imagine I've done it maybe 7 to 10 times. Wow. But it's been a show that's gone on for several years, I think, right?
And in Palm Springs once?
Just once, yeah.
You coming back?
Yeah. Yeah, probably. I mean, I'd have to talk to Larry about that. It's,
your story's pretty good.
Thank you.
So have you named your novel yet?
It has a working title of Newmarket, which was the name of the small British town we lived in, and it's a British racing town. But I also like the word new in it, so it might be called that. I had an earlier draft that I used the title of one of my mother's paintings. Oh. And I liked the title, but my agent seemed to not like it. But I should run it by you. It was a painting of me as a 6 or 7-year-old sort of lying my head on a dresser. And the title, which was my father's title, interestingly enough, was Where Did You Go? Out. What Did You Do? Nothing. Which, given my father's story, was interesting. So I thought of that as a title for the novel, but for some reason that didn't seem to excite my agent.
Did he think it was too long or what? Or didn't he say why?
She did not say why. Maybe it was too vague. I don't know. I'm not a title person.
We got an agent. That's good news.
I do have a
lot
lovely
of people
agent.
On here that don't have agents. So.
Yeah.
How long is that? been going
Well, I published a memoir, which was actually a bestseller, and so
Really?
that helps you.
Definitely.
And then my first novel is also published. So she came on board then, and the way that it works is that if you sell something, you tend to keep your agent. Does that make sense?
Because they get a paycheck,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. It tends to work that way. So
It's always about money, isn't it?
yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's about it being a successful partnership, which involves money. But if you don't sell something and they can't sell it, then that's not really much of a relationship.
So you have 2 published pieces.
I have 2
now?
published.
Cool.
Yeah.
Third one's coming up.
Yeah.
When's it going to be done?
I hope that it's going to be done by the end of the summer. That's my own. I give myself arbitrary deadlines just to motivate myself.
Do you write every day?
I do normally. I've been teaching a little too much lately to do that, but I just booked a 3-week vacation. I put that in quotes in Santiago, Chile, where my younger brother lives, and he has a bedroom he's going to give me, and I'm going to work for 3 weeks on the novel.
So you're not going with the family, I presume, your husband.
No, I'm just ditching. It literally is a working vacation. Like I want to write all day. They are teachers. They'll be out of the house and trust me, want me to do my own thing. So I try to find isolated times to write. But under normal circumstances, I write almost every day. Yeah.
So going there to write, I can see where you wouldn't have all the normal distractions. But then for me, I'd say, oh, I wonder what all this is about. And I'd be curious to go get involved and do stuff there. Have you been there before?
I haven't, but I've traveled extensively like that.
Okay.
So my brother works in international schools. So before that, I went to Nairobi to visit them. I've been to Cairo, New Delhi. Those are the kinds of places that they spend time in. And yes, I definitely want to see Santiago, but the way that my writing practice usually works is I get up and write probably until about 2, and then I love to be able to go out on my own and think about the book as I'm poking around and seeing new things. So.
I meant to ask you earlier. So how did you actually meet Pat?
I met Pat. I went back to visit friends of mine at IU when I was in New York, and he was in a play with several of my friends, and I eyeballed him. We had a very brief 3-day affair, and I thought, that's it. I'm done with that. That was a little bit of fun and
you were in your 20s
fun and done.
then or something?
23, I think. And I went back to New York and didn't think much about him at all, but he pursued me.
You're supposed to say I went back and I thought about him every moment. It's like, nah, that's
I did
fun.
eventually. I was kind of like, oh, that's that. He didn't fit my model of what I thought. Isn't that always the case? He didn't fit my idea of what I thought my partner was going to be like. And so you don't really see that, right? If you've got that imprinted on your brain.
Right.
And so it took a while. And he was the smart one who kept sort of showing up and, walking me home from things and stuff like that. It was very low pressure. And after a while, I kind of shifted.
He visited in New York or what?
No. Oh, I skipped a part of the story.
Gotcha.
I moved to Chicago.
Oh.
He moved to Chicago.
Oh.
We were both in Chicago. He then started
ain't that convenient.
Showing up. and I think that kind of low level, just I'm being here, sort of shifts your idea, right, of who you start, or at least what happens to me is I start looking at him and thinking, well, why not, Pat? He's good at like physics tricks. He can, burn matches and support, spoons on top of matches and build things and make me laugh. And,
How long have you been married?
We have been married for 32 years.
Whoa. What do you like about him?
I like that. Well, for one thing, he's my best friend, sort of like my parents.
That's a good starter.
We love the same things, which is great. Not all of them. Like, he's a big sports geek. That's not me. But I enjoy that he likes it. But we like art and theater and all of those things. But the main thing is he makes me laugh. Cool. Makes me laugh really hard. And he's smart. And we were just talking this morning about how we both are able to call each other on our own shit. And I didn't want to marry somebody who was just a cheerleader, clearly, because I didn't get that. I got somebody who is definitely in my court, but also is somewhat rigorous with me, and vice versa.
So you live in Hollywood, you said?
We do.
You were there during COVID?
Yep.
How'd that go?
Well, Wilkinson. The day
well, you're still married, so that's a plus.
It went okay. Although I will say that we had some of the worst arguments that we've ever had in our entire lives during COVID.
Because of the 24/7 thing?
I think it was because the 24/7 thing, but the addendum to that is that they were the most productive fights we've ever had.
Cool.
So they were painful and really close to the bone, but they were fights that moved our relationship forward. And I feel like we're in a much stronger place than we were going in without even really knowing that.
Wow.
But I think it's because you're kind of forced into this situation with somebody, and it's like, well, this thing that always bugged me, but I could always walk out of the room and ignore it, is now something I can't ignore. Right. So we're going to talk about it, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Forced therapy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and I actually did go to therapy online, on Zoom, which I think made a really huge difference during COVID. But I know that I'm probably not alone because I've told this story to other people. I remember we live in an apartment. We don't exactly have a balcony, but we have a fire escape type thing. Right. And I was standing out there. I had bought myself a pack of cigarettes, which I'm embarrassed to say, during a respiratory illness. You know, it's like
wait a minute. So
dumbest thing.
I'm visual, so I want to picture this. So you climbed out the window and you're standing on the ladder fire escape.
Yeah, it's not
Smoking.
on the it's not out the window,
stairway.
But still, it's a stairway type thing.
All right.
I had quit for years smoking. I hadn't smoked in like 20 odd years or whatever. But I just was stressed because everybody didn't know what this thing was. And what came to mind was, I'll buy a pack of cigarettes, which is the most ridiculous thing on the planet, right? for such incredible, obvious reasons. And I lit up a cigarette and I was looking at all of these apartment buildings that were in front of me and all the lights inside the different houses. And I wondered what that looked like for all these people to be isolated in those little glass boxes that I was seeing, essentially. And that really is a great visual. I know.
I can picture a movie.
Yeah, exactly, right? Somebody should write that.
Yeah.
And I was sitting there smoking, and I remember that my thought was, how am I going to survive this for 2 weeks?
Yeah, because COVID's going to last 2 weeks.
Do you know, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
And I thought, I'll never make it through 2 weeks. Isn't that the craziest thing,
really,
given how long we ended up going?
But you made it.
I did make it.
Your kids did okay during that time?
We did. They did. My older son was with his girlfriend and her family, and that was hard for me because we couldn't really see each other without a mask on, or it just was, from a mommy's zone, emotionally painful. Well, I don't know how, as opposed to physically painful. It was just difficult to be away because it was so scary.
Right.
It was, and we all, there were fantastical ideas of like, I truly believed that it was possible that I could die without ever seeing my older son again.
Right.
I thought that was a possible thing. But the other kid was with us. He was a junior year in high school. And so I give him incredible props because can you imagine this 16-year-old boy in a 3-room apartment with his parents for a year and a half, I think, before we ever really came out, right? So he he muddled through, and he seemed to like us just fine, which I still think is spectacular. And maybe he had a lot more problems than he shared, but we
Maybe
got
you should
along
nominate
okay.
him for sainthood or
I know,
something.
exactly, right? We watched the Great British Bake Off together
Wow.
at night with the three of us, because we couldn't find something that all three of us really, that was one of the few things that we could find that we could all
Did everybody gain weight?
initially, and then we did this huge diet in the
really?
middle of COVID.
All of
and
you?
all of us, all three of us, and we each lost over 20 pounds.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Good stories. So looking back at your life, what are a couple things you've learned?
What have I learned? Oh, the main thing I've learned, and it sort of links up to my father's story, I think, is that you don't know anyone's story. And I tell that to myself all the time. When people are crabby with you, when they're, any number of stories that I can make up about what they think about me or why they're
Right.
that person. And I spend a considerable amount of energy reminding myself that I don't know their story. And it creates a certain amount of equanimity.
And some grace.
And some grace.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's my biggest
What
life
else?
lesson.
Anything else?
I told that this is only coming to mind because I told this to my students yesterday when I was sort of being funny about a 67-year-old woman who kept telling me that we were the same age. And I'm like, I'm 62. I'm in the back of my head. And I was talking, my students tend to be in their 20s and 30s mostly, on Zoom. And I told them that I never complain about my age, and I always announce it proudly because my best friend was a gay man who died when he was 31 from AIDS. And I was with him when he died in the hospital. And as he took his last breaths, I promised him that I would never, ever complain about getting older because he never got to be older. And so that's another thing that I carry with me, and it's a promise I've kept. I tell everybody, all of my girlfriends are like, stop telling your age, because then everybody can figure out our age.
It rubs off on
And
you.
I like walk around and say, I'm Brett Paesel and I'm 62 years old. I'm keeping a promise to a dead friend.
Wow. Well, that just opened up a little something here. So was he your only gay friend that died, or?
No, I lost a lot of friends
Really?
because I'm an actor, so obviously in the artistic fields, especially in the 80s, that was a safe place for LGBTQ members to the community to feel more accepted than they would in the general population. So that's why you would know a fair amount of gay people. So I think I feel bad about this, but I think I at some point added them up, and I remember coming up with 17 people that I lost.
And it's interesting for somebody in my age bracket. I mean, I'm in Palm Springs and almost everybody's partner, but it's like the population's gone from that time.
Right.
The dating pool's down.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I go occasionally to high school reunions, but because because our schools were overseas, you don't go overseas. It's always at some weird convention center in Houston or something like that.
Oh, really?
And it's Kaiserslautern American High School reunion. And then the other thing they often do is it's all the years, because that's the way you get a convention center, right? So it's everybody who ever went to Kaiserslautern American High School flies down to Houston for 3 days. It's the craziest thing.
And you've done this.
I've done this.
Okay.
And so, but they had this hall in the first one that I went to, and it would each year had up on a sort of board all of the people who had died from that year. And what was interesting to me was that in the 60s, all these people died in Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
And so you'd see like all of these names, young men's names. And then in the 80s, it was the same. It looked the same. And that was all the guys who had died from AIDS.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's when it sort of was this visual of, oh, it was a war. It's literally the same. It even physically looks like that.
I don't want to end on a sad note because you walked in and we started talking and we got really sad out there.
We did.
We don't
Sorry
do that.
I tend to be intense.
No,
is
I
the word.
brought my stuff in then too. So, but I think I'd like to end with, what are you excited about coming up?
I am very excited about my son getting married, my 23-year-old, to a lovely young woman and expanding my family. And I'm very excited about what I call my 20 good years. So I'm 62. I'm looking at doing with my last iteration, my last act in which I can still move around and still do all those things as an exciting adventure of what can I do next. So we're thinking of moving overseas. I want to
where?
We're looking at San Miguel Allende in Mexico. We're looking at Portugal. I would love to move to Ireland. I don't know that we make enough money. There's all sorts of things boxes you have to check wherever you move. But so I'm very excited about the next act. Now I don't have children that I'm beholden to, although of course I'm always here because I want to be. But
you better get out of Dodge because your son's gonna get married, then the kids will come, and then grandma.
Exactly. They're very committed to not having children, but we'll
really?
see.
Oh, cool.
But I also I do admit that part of my wanting to leave and have my own adventure with my husband is so that I don't obsess on them and don't sort of become the interfering, grabby parent, which I can see I can see her in me. If that makes sense. You know what I mean? So I think I can rescue them from my neediness by leaving and having my own thing.
Well, it sounds like fun.
Yeah.
Can I go with you?
You can visit, for sure.
Okay. Hey, thanks for coming in. This was great.
No problem. My pleasure. Thank you.